He was the kind of doctor people stood for when he entered a room, rich, adored, untouchable. She was just the black maid they never bothered to see. But one arrogant joke, one careless challenge, lit the fire he never saw coming. She stood there in silence, clutching her father's old notebook, the one holding the secret that could bring his empire to its knees. The crystal chandeliers over the St. Aurelius ballroom threw soft gold light across a sea of tuxedos and satin gowns. Waiters glided through the crowd carrying trays of champagne that caught the light like fragments of sunlight. In the far corner, beside a marble pillar, Amara Johnson moved quietly with a silver tray balanced on her palm. Her uniform was freshly pressed, her shoes polished to a dull shine, but no one really looked at her. The guests' laughter drowned even the sound of her footsteps. Dr. Richard Kane stood at the center of the room, like a man certain the world revolved around him. He was in his mid-50s, tall, silver-haired, famous for saving the lives of governors and CEOs. Tonight, his voice carried easily across the ballroom as he waved a stack of papers in one hand. "Just in from Lagos," he said with a grin. "A set of medical notes from our new research partners, written entirely in Yoruba. Brilliant minds, I'm sure, but I can't make sense of a word of it." Laughter rippled through the donors. Someone called out, "Use Google Translate." Another added, "Or have one of the residents take a stab." Kane smirked, pretending to consider. "Tell you what," he said, raising the pages higher. "Whoever can translate this gets double pay for the week. Deal?" The crowd laughed again, too loudly, as if afraid not to. Across the room, Amara froze mid-step. The word Yoruba tightened in her chest like a fist. Her father's language, her childhood lullabies. She turned slightly, watching the doctor's manicured fingers crease the pages that might have come from her own homeland. Kane's eyes swept the room and landed on her. "How about you?" he said, half teasing. "You're from somewhere down there, aren't you? Nigeria?" The laughter turned sharper. "Maybe you can tell us what it says." A warmth climbed up her neck, spreading into her ears. "I only clean the floors, sir," she said softly. "Well," Kane replied, still smiling, "that might put you closer to the ground language." He winked at the board members, proud of his joke. The air left the room for her. Amara kept her head down, focusing on the pattern of the parquet beneath her shoes, on the rhythm of her breathing. The tray trembled slightly in her hands, and one glass clinked against another. The guests were already turning away, laughter fading into the general murmur of music and conversation. To them, it was a harmless jest. To her, it was a wound reopened. She retreated toward the serving station at the edge of the hall. Through the kitchen doors, she could still hear Kane's booming voice as he launched into another story about a surgery he'd performed in record time. She set the tray down and pressed her hands flat against the counter, trying to steady them. The stainless steel felt cold beneath her palms. Beside her, another worker, Maria from housekeeping, gave a small shake of her head. "You okay, honey?" Amara managed a thin smile. "I'm fine." Maria muttered in Spanish. Men like him think their mouths are made of gold. Amara didn't answer. She reached instinctively for the pendant beneath her collar, a small brass circle engraved with the initials AJ, her father's. The chain had darkened with time, but the metal still carried warmth, as if it remembered his touch. "Translate this," she whispered under her breath, echoing Kane's words, tasting the bitterness of them. The pendant pressed against her skin like a heartbeat. The rest of the night blurred together. The endless clinking of glasses, the band's rehearsed jazz numbers, the smell of perfume and roasted lamb. She kept moving, silent, invisible, performing the choreography she knew by heart. Smile, nod, step back. But every time she passed the table where Kane had left that stack of papers, her eyes caught the faint black ink of Yoruba characters along the margins. She knew those loops and accents, the rhythm of the script, even without reading. Her father had filled notebooks with them. When the event finally ended and the guests drifted away, Amara stayed behind to clear the tables. Champagne stains glowed like small moons on the linen cloths. She gathered the used glasses into crates, her movements automatic. From the other side of the room, Kane's laughter echoed once more as he left through the side corridor, arm in arm with the chief administrator. "Double pay," he repeated, chuckling. "Imagine that, as if anyone here could." When the door closed, silence settled over the ballroom. Only the faint hum of the air conditioning and the soft sweep of her broom remained. She walked toward the table where he had stood, drawn as if by gravity. The papers were still there, spread out, half folded, forgotten. She hesitated. One glance wouldn't hurt. The first line leapt at her. Aphonalaye, formula for sustained anesthesia. Her breath caught. She knew that phrase. Her father had written it once on the cover of his research journal. He had spent years refining a method for safer, cheaper anesthesia, promising to share it freely with hospitals across Africa. He'd called it his gift to humanity. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. Technical diagrams, handwritten annotations, some stamped with the logo of a U.S. pharmaceutical firm. She recognized certain passages, his phrases, his metaphors, his tiny misspellings carried over into print. Somewhere between Lagos and Boston, his work had been stolen, edited, and renamed. The kitchen door swung open suddenly, and Amara shoved the papers back into place. The head waiter poked his head in. "We're locking up." "You done?" "Yes, sir," she said quickly. He nodded and disappeared. She stood for a moment longer, staring at the polished surface of the table. In the reflection, her own face looked unfamiliar. Tired eyes, hair tied back under a plain cap, a woman no one noticed. Outside, snow had begun to fall, soft and soundless against the tall windows. She watched it for a while, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded bus ticket, the one she'd been saving to visit her mother in the nursing home. Her shift pay barely covered rent. The visit would have to wait again. As she turned off the ballroom lights, the darkness swallowed the gold and glass, leaving only the faint outline of the table where the papers lay. For a moment she stood there, caught between the woman she had become and the one she used to be. In her father's voice, deep and calm, she heard the echo of an old lesson. Words build bridges between worlds, Amara, but only if someone is brave enough to speak them. She locked the door behind her and stepped into the cold. The night air smelled of snow and exhaust. Across the parking lot, the hospital tower rose against the sky, its windows glowing like eyes that had never once looked her way. She pulled her coat tighter, whispering again to no one, "Translate this, and I'll double your pay." Then, after a pause that lingered like a promise, she added quietly, The morning after the gala, Amara woke to the metallic clang of the radiator beside her bed. The old heater groaned like an exhausted worker, puffing out air that smelled faintly of rust. Sunlight leaked through the thin curtains, striping the floorboards of her small apartment. For a long moment she lay still, listening to the traffic below, the city already in motion, people who didn't know her name rushing toward jobs that paid them to forget others existed. Her hands ached from the 12-hour shift, but her mind was still caught on the scene from last night. Kane's laughter, the way the crowd had roared, the way her own silence had tasted like iron in her mouth. She sat up slowly, pulling on her faded robe. The small desk near the window was cluttered with old papers and a cracked laptop that took several minutes to wake. Next to it lay a photograph, her father, Dr. Adewale Johnson, smiling in a white coat that hung too loose on his thin frame. His arm was around her shoulder, a stethoscope draped between them like a bridge. She ran a finger along the edge of the picture, tracing the faint fold where the paper had begun to tear. "You'd have said something," she whispered. "You always did." The smell of boiling cassava came from the neighbor's kitchen. Somewhere, a baby cried, a sound half sorrow, half hunger. Amara reached for her phone. 4 missed calls from the nursing home blinked on the screen. Her mother had another fall during the night. They needed permission for x-rays and a payment extension. She closed her eyes, the familiar knot forming in her chest. Every month was the same arithmetic of survival, rent, food, medical bills, none of it ever adding up. She thought of the hospital, the marble floors she polished, the halls where she used to imagine herself walking as a doctor instead of a cleaner. Years earlier, back in Lagos, the light had been different. It was warm even in the shade, and her father's voice carried easily through the open windows of the small clinic he ran. She could still see him at the desk, glasses slipping down his nose, hands moving with careful precision as he wrote notes in both English and Yoruba. "Medicine," he used to say, "is another language. You listen to the body until it tells you what it needs." Patients came from miles away, farmers, school teachers, mothers with feverish children. and her father treated them all with the same patience. When the letter came from the American pharmaceutical company, he'd been so proud. They wanted to collaborate on his formula for a new anesthetic blend. He had believed it meant recognition, maybe funding for the clinic. He hadn't known that signing the papers would give them ownership. By the time he realized, the formula had been patented under a different name and the company had vanished behind lawyers and fine print. The stress consumed him. His heart gave out one humid afternoon while he was writing yet another letter demanding justice. Amara remembered the funeral vividly, the smell of rain-soaked earth, the wails of her relatives, her mother's silence. She had been 21 then, her acceptance letter from medical school still unopened in her pocket. She left for America 2 months later with a scholarship and more hope than luggage. She thought hard work would be enough. But in Boston, her credentials became meaningless. Every door she knocked on required U.S. certification. Every application ended with polite rejection letters that all sounded the same. We appreciate your interest, but she worked nights at a motel, mornings at a grocery store, afternoons studying for an exam she could never afford to take. When her mother's visa expired and the illness worsened, Amara dropped out to care for her. The scholarship vanished, the bills didn't, and so she found herself at St. Aurelius Hospital, holding a mop instead of a scalpel. The laptop screen flickered to life. She opened a folder labeled Father's Notes. Most of the files were scans of the old journals he'd written in longhand, pages filled with diagrams of lungs, chemical notations, and small doodles of birds in the margins. She'd scanned them years ago before leaving home, afraid they'd be lost. The handwriting was uneven but alive. She clicked open one page at random. F and Alaye, formula for sustained anesthesia. The same phrase she'd seen on Kane's documents. Her breath slowed, the room narrowing around her. There was a knock at the door. She jumped slightly. Amara, it's Emily. She opened the door to find Emily Cho standing in the hallway, still in scrubs, hair tied back in a messy knot. Emily was a surgical nurse, kind-eyed, and always in a hurry. I wanted to make sure you were okay after last night, she said. I saw what happened. I'm fine, Amara lied. Emily frowned. You shouldn't let him talk to you like that. He's an ass, but he's not untouchable. Amara gave a small shrug. In this city, men like him own the locks, and women like me don't even get keys. Emily hesitated, then reached into her bag. He left the Yoruba documents in the conference room again. Maybe you could? Look? Just out of curiosity. Amara stared at her. Why? Because you looked like you wanted to scream last night, Emily said quietly. And because sometimes the only way to fight people like him is to know exactly what they're hiding. Amara took the folded packet, her heart thudding. You didn't see me take this. Emily smiled faintly. What's one more secret in this place? When she left, Amara sat back down, the papers heavy in her lap. The snow outside had thickened, coating the city in a clean white that felt like mockery. She spread the pages across the desk. The text was dense, filled with chemical names and procedural details. But between the lines, she saw her father's voice again. The phrasing, the rhythm of explanation. The company's logo stamped at the bottom turned her stomach. She worked through the morning, translating notes into English on a pad of paper. For each Yoruba term, she wrote its meaning softly to herself, as if reciting prayer. Alafia, peace, Ima, light, I, life. Her father's formula wasn't just science, it was philosophy. He believed medicine should belong to everyone. When the phone rang again from the nursing home, she didn't answer. She couldn't bear to hear another number she didn't have. Instead, she kept translating, line after line, until her fingers cramped. Around noon, she stopped and rubbed her eyes. The words blurred. A soft knock startled her once more. Maria holding a paper bag. Lunch, the older woman said. I brought jollof rice. You forget to eat. Amara smiled gratefully. You always know. Maria shrugged. We take care of each other, yes? The bosses won't. She noticed the stack of papers. Homework? Something like that, Amara said. Old ghosts. Maria tapped her arm gently, then make them useful. After she left, Amara leaned back in her chair. Through the window, the hospital's tower loomed gray against the sky. Somewhere inside, Kane was probably discussing his research with the board, polishing his reputation just as she polished his floors. The injustice burned, but beneath it was something else. Resolve. She picked up her father's photograph again. His eyes, calm and certain, seemed to meet hers. "You once said knowledge is power," she murmured. "Maybe it's time I remember that." As evening crept in, she stacked the translated pages carefully into a folder. The room was dim, but her hands were steady now. She didn't know exactly what she planned to do yet, only that silence no longer felt like safety. Outside, the snow kept falling, blanketing the streets in quiet light. For the first time in years, she felt the smallest spark of the woman she used to be, the student, the dreamer, the daughter of a man who believed words could heal. She whispered the phrase again softly, like a vow. Efunalaye, life shared. Then she turned off the lamp and let the darkness settle, knowing that soon she would have to walk back into the same halls that had taken everything from her, and find a way to take something back. By Monday, the hospital smelled of disinfectant and ambition. Amara pushed her cleaning cart down the bright corridors, the wheels squeaking over polished tile. The weekend snow had melted into gray slush outside, but inside St. Aurelius everything gleamed, as if spotless floors could erase the stains beneath them. Her badge hung crooked on her uniform, her name barely legible after years of use. She'd hidden her father's notebook under the false bottom of the cart. Every few minutes she glanced around to make sure no one was near before touching it, as though even her thoughts could betray her. She'd spent the last 2 nights rereading every page of that Yoruba research file Emily had given her. The words haunted her. Efun alaye, life shared. Her father's phrase, stripped of his name, now property of men like Richard Kane. At the nurses' station, she overheard voices. Dr. Kane was speaking to the chief administrator, Dr. Harlan. "We'll need to have the research team translate the rest by Friday," he said. "I want it ready for the investors' presentation next week. It's going to change everything." "Do you even know what it says yet?" Harlan asked. Kane laughed. "That's what I pay the experts for. Half these foreign notes are filler anyway." Their laughter drifted down the hallway, scraping against her nerves. She ducked into an empty supply room and leaned against the wall, closing her eyes until her pulse slowed. Somewhere deep inside, anger began to burn, not wild, but steady, like a pilot light waiting for gas. Later that afternoon, Emily found her outside the break room. "You okay?" she asked, lowering her voice. "He's in a good mood today. That usually means he's about to steal someone's idea." Amara looked up from her mop. "He's calling it his discovery." Emily hesitated, scanning the hallway. "Maybe you should show someone what you found. Go to HR, or even the ethics board." "HR doesn't even know I exist," Amara said. "And ethics?" She gave a small, bitter smile. "Those are for people with names on doors." Emily sighed. "Then at least make a copy. If he's going to profit off your father's work, you should have proof." That night, Amara returned to the staff lounge after most of the employees had gone home. The hospital never truly slept. Machines hummed, and the smell of antiseptic hung in the air. She sat at the computer station reserved for custodial reports and inserted a flash drive she'd borrowed from Emily. The documents loaded slowly, the Yoruba symbols scrolling across the screen like a language resurrected from another lifetime. Her fingers moved instinctively, translating line by line into English. Each word seemed to breathe again in her father's voice. The formula wasn't just technical. It described a process that allowed anesthesia to sustain brain oxygenation longer during surgery, reducing complications in low-resource hospitals. It was revolutionary and cheap. In the margins, she found an annotation marked Kane Revision, proprietary adaptation. He had replaced her father's equation with a formula that required a costly synthetic compound produced by one of the hospital's sponsors. She whispered the words aloud, her throat tight. They turned life into profit. Her phone buzzed on the desk, breaking her focus. It was a text from Maria. "Be careful. Security rounds early tonight." She quickly saved the translation and pulled out the drive. On her way out, she passed the darkened conference room. Through the glass, she saw the pile of Yoruba documents Kane had shown at the gala, still lying carelessly on the table beside half-empty coffee cups. Something in her chest shifted. She walked in, her shoes silent on the carpet. The city lights reflected in the windows, painting her shadow across the table. She laid the flash drive beside the papers and began reading through the pages again, marking corrections in pencil. The handwriting, her father's precise script, the The spacing, even the phrasing, confirmed what she already knew. When she finished, she tore a clean sheet from her notepad and wrote in neat block letters, "Your translation is incorrect. The formula describes shared open source anesthesia, not exclusive rights. Stop claiming what you don't understand. AJ." She hesitated before signing, then underlined the initials once. It was bold, reckless even, but the secrecy gave her courage. She placed the note on top of the pile and slipped away into the corridor. The next morning, whispers spread across the executive floor. "Someone corrected the Yoruba file," a lab assistant said. "It's not from our department." By noon, the rumor had grown legs. Dr. Kane stormed into the research office, waving the annotated papers. "Who the hell is AJ?" he demanded. No one answered. Amara was polishing the glass doors outside when he passed her, his face flushed. For a moment she thought he might somehow sense her guilt, but he didn't even look her way. She bent lower, cleaning in slow circles, hiding a smile that felt dangerous. At lunch, Emily found her in the cafeteria. "You wouldn't happen to know anything about the mysterious AJ, would you?" she whispered. Amara kept her eyes on her tray. People see what they want to see. "Well, Kane's losing his mind. He hates being corrected, especially in front of his little army of yes men." Emily grinned. "Whoever did it just made my week." That evening, Amara returned home exhausted but lighter. She reheated a bowl of leftover rice, the cheap kind that stuck to the spoon, and ate by the window. The city glowed in distant amber light. For the first time in years, she felt something close to satisfaction. Then, while washing her dishes, her phone buzzed again. Emily's message was brief. "They're crediting Kane for a flawless translation at tomorrow's briefing. He erased your initials." Amara's breath caught. The small spark of pride she'd felt turned to ash. She set the phone down and gripped the edge of the sink. So that was how it would always be, the powerful taking, the invisible cleaning up afterward. She pressed her forehead to her arm, willing herself not to cry. When she finally lifted her head, her reflection in the kitchen window looked different. Harder, older. "No more secrets," she whispered. She dried her hands and pulled the flash drive from her pocket. Inside it was the truth, proof of her father's authorship, proof of Kane's theft. She held it up to the light, its tiny metal surface catching the reflection of her father's framed photo on the wall. "I'll find a way," she said softly. Outside, the sirens of the city wailed somewhere far away, a lonely chorus echoing her heartbeat. She set the flash drive beside the photo and switched off the lamp. In the quiet, she could almost hear her father's voice again, calm and steady. "Knowledge illuminates, Amara, but only if you dare to turn it on." The snow outside the hospital had turned into thin gray sheets of rain by the time Amara returned for her evening shift. The smell of bleach and overworked air conditioning greeted her like an old enemy. She pushed her cleaning cart down the silent corridor, nodding to the security guard as she passed. On the executive floor, lights still burned behind glass walls, the doctors too addicted to their importance to ever go home. She paused by the conference room door, her pulse steady but her hands damp. The papers she had corrected 2 nights earlier lay scattered across the table, her own handwriting gone. Her initials, AJ, had been scrubbed out with a thick black marker. From inside she heard laughter. Dr. Kane's voice carried easily, self-satisfied and loud. "Gentlemen, the translation was simpler than expected," he was saying. "I took the liberty of clarifying some of the more poetic African phrasing. Science should sound scientific, not sentimental." Another man chuckled. "You're a man of many talents, Richard." Amara kept moving, her steps careful and silent. She had work to do and no time to be seen. But as she turned the corner, she almost collided with Emily. The nurse was carrying a folder and a cup of coffee, her expression tense. "He's in there bragging again," Emily whispered. "Telling the board the formula's his own revision. They're putting his name on the proposal for funding." Amara looked down the hallway. Through the glass, she saw Kane holding up the documents, gesturing toward diagrams her father had drawn decades ago. Her stomach turned. "He's signing my father's name off the page," she said quietly. "Then take it back," Emily urged. "Show them the notes. Show someone." Amara shook her head. "Without proof, they'll fire me, or worse, they'll call it theft, say I accessed restricted files." Emily sighed, glancing around. "You can't let him get away with it forever." Forever's already started, Amara said. Later that night, when the last of the executives had gone, she slipped into the conference room. The faint hum of the city filtered through the glass windows. Coffee stains dotted the table, and the whiteboard still displayed fragments of Kane's handwriting, arrows, chemical names, scribbles of arrogance. Amara took a deep breath and pulled her father's notebook from beneath her cleaning supplies. The pages were soft with age, the corners bent from years of travel. She flipped to the formula. The handwriting was unmistakable, the same looping characters, the same sequence of ratios now appearing under Kane's name. Her phone buzzed. It was Maria, checking in from home. "You still at that place?" the older woman asked. "For a little while longer," Amara said. "You work too hard for people who don't see you." "They see me," Amara replied. "They just don't look." Maria chuckled sadly. "Be careful, child." When the call ended, Amara opened a fresh notebook and began to write. She copied the Yoruba terms line by line, translating them carefully into English beside each one. At the top she wrote in block letters, "Original Formula by Dr. Adewale Johnson, 2002. Then underneath, she added the modern edits she'd found in Kane's files, highlighting every change that introduced the synthetic compound. She knew enough chemistry to recognize what it meant. Higher costs, higher risks, more control for the company sponsoring the hospital's new project. Around midnight, a door creaked open behind her. Amara spun around, heart racing. Emily stood there, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You scared me," Amara said, pressing a hand to her chest. "I figured you'd still be here," Emily said, setting a cup down. "Security does rounds every hour now. I'll keep watch." Together they worked in silence. The rain outside turned heavier, drumming against the windows. At one point Emily asked, "What are you going to do with this when it's done?" Amara paused, looking at her father's name. "I don't know. Maybe leave it where he'll have to read it. Maybe make him choke on it." Emily smiled faintly. "That's a start." By dawn, the folder on the table held the full translation, precise, complete, undeniable. Amara's fingers cramped from writing, but a quiet pride settled in her chest. She slipped the finished pages into a manila envelope and wrote across the front, "To whom truth still matters." She placed it beneath the stack of Kane's notes, weighed down by a coffee mug so it wouldn't blow away in the air vents. When she returned that afternoon for her regular shift, the building buzzed with rumor. Kane had presented the full translation to the administration that morning. Genius work, people said. He even stayed overnight to finish it. The words stung, each one sharper than the last. In the cafeteria, Emily caught her eye and shook her head. "He took it all, Amara. Even the phrasing. He's calling it the Kane Protocol now." Amara forced a smile she didn't feel. "That's what they do," she said quietly. "They rename what they steal." "He can't hide forever. People talk. People forget faster," Amara replied. She turned away before Emily could see her tears. That evening, she cleaned the operating theater while surgeons prepped for the next day's schedule. One of the interns left the television on in the corner, tuned to a local health segment. The anchor's voice floated through the sterile air. "Dr. Richard Kane, head of cardiovascular research at St. Aurelius, has announced a breakthrough in anesthetic development promising to make surgeries safer worldwide." The camera showed him standing at a podium, smiling modestly. Behind him, projected on the screen, were the Yoruba characters of her father's formula. The mop slipped from Amara's hand and clattered to the floor. A nurse turned, startled. "You okay?" She nodded quickly, picking it up. "Just tired." When she got home, she sat at her kitchen table in silence. The news replayed in her mind. His voice, his smile, the applause. Her father's picture stared back at her from the shelf, patient and wordless. "They erased you again?" she whispered. "And I let them." She reached for the flash drive she'd saved, the one containing her complete translation. She turned it over in her hand, small and cold and full of power. She could still expose him if she was willing to risk everything. But she had no allies beyond Emily, no guarantee anyone would listen to a maid with a foreign degree and no credentials. A gust of wind rattled the window pane, and the city lights flickered below. In that moment, she felt the weight of 2 worlds pressing against her, the one that had dismissed her father and the one that now ignored his daughter. Between them, she stood invisible. Yet somewhere beneath the exhaustion, a spark refused to die. She opened her notebook and wrote a single line at the bottom of the last page. They can steal the words, but not the meaning. Then she closed it, set it beside her father's photo, and whispered into the dark, "I'm not done." The hospital felt colder that week, though the heat was turned up high. The radiators hissed in protest, but the air carried a tension that seeped into every corner. Amara moved through it like a shadow, cleaning rooms and hallways while pretending not to hear the whispers that followed her. Security had started doing random checks, asking questions about after-hours access. The words "data breach" floated through the building like smoke. She kept her eyes on the floor, her hands steady, her mind racing. By Thursday morning, she knew the rumor had reached the top. The hospital's IT department had traced the midnight logins to her custodial badge. It didn't matter that Emily had given her permission, that she'd only been translating what was already theirs. The system didn't care about intent. It cared about power. And power belonged to men like Richard Kane. She was polishing the brass railing outside the main conference room when she heard his voice. "She's on the list," he told the head of security. "Her ID was used. We can't take chances." His tone was measured, but there was something almost gleeful underneath it. The head of security nodded. "We'll question her this afternoon." Amara kept her back turned, the rag in her hand trembling. She wanted to run, but she forced herself to keep wiping in slow, even strokes. When she finally dared to look up, Kane was watching her from across the hallway, a faint smile playing on his lips. He didn't have to say anything. The message was clear. He had her cornered. The interview happened in a small office that smelled of old carpet and nervous sweat. A security officer asked questions in a rehearsed monotone about her shift hours, her access card, whether she'd ever entered restricted areas. "No, sir," she said again and again, lowering her eyes in practiced humility. She knew how to play this role. She'd been playing it all her life. The quiet immigrant woman who spoke broken English, who didn't understand the big words, who couldn't possibly be a threat. When it was over, they let her go with a warning. "Stay away from executive offices," the officer said. "One more issue and you're done." She thanked him as if he'd done her a kindness, then returned to the janitor's closet. Her hands shook as she hung up her cleaning cloth. She had survived for now, but the net was tightening. That evening, while she was emptying trash bins near the administrative wing, she found her locker door slightly open. Inside, her things had been tossed around. Uniforms, spare gloves, her lunch bag. The bottom shelf was empty. Her father's notebook was gone. Panic shot through her chest. She searched the locker twice, then 3 times, her breath quickening. The faint scent of sandalwood still clung to the metal shelf, mocking her. She turned, and there he was. Kane stood in the doorway, twirling the worn leather notebook between his fingers like a prize. "Looking for this?" Her throat tightened. "That's mine." "Is it?" He turned the pages idly, glancing at the handwriting. "Strange. These notes look awfully similar to the research we've been developing." "You stole that from my father," she said, the words spilling before she could stop them. He arched a brow, amused. "Your father? You mean the same man who supposedly wrote a groundbreaking formula but never published it? The same one who left no credentials, no patents, nothing but a few scribbles in another language? Come now, Miss Johnson. Do you really expect anyone to believe that?" She took a step forward. "Give it back." He snapped the notebook shut. "You should be careful. Carrying unauthorized materials in a hospital lab could be considered corporate espionage. I'd hate to see immigration get involved." The threat hung heavy in the air. Amara's stomach dropped. He knew exactly where to cut, where it hurt most. "I'm not afraid of you," she said quietly. "Of course you are," he replied. "Everyone is." He slipped the notebook into his briefcase and walked away, leaving her standing amid the rows of metal lockers. Her reflection fractured across the dull surfaces. She didn't move for a long time. When she finally did, her hands were cold, her pulse pounding in her ears. She went to find Emily, but the nurse had already gone home. The rest of the staff avoided her now, whispering behind clipped smiles. The next morning, she received an email from Human Resources requesting her presence for a formal review. The meeting was brief. 2 administrators sat across from her, their voices rehearsed and distant. Due to recent concerns regarding the handling of confidential information, we're issuing a written warning, one said. Any further incidents may result in termination. She signed the paper silently, her name small and careful, as if afraid to draw too much attention. That night, she visited her mother at the nursing home. The old woman was asleep, her breathing shallow. Machines beeped softly in rhythm with the clock on the wall. Amara sat by the bed, holding her mother's hand, the weight of the day pressing down. "They took his book," she whispered. "They're taking everything again." Her mother stirred, but didn't wake. On the way home, she stopped by a small church, the kind that always smelled of wax and dust. The pews were empty. She knelt, not to pray exactly, but to listen. The silence there felt kinder than any words she could summon. She remembered her father's voice, calm even when the world had wronged him. "If they steal your light, let them choke on the smoke." The next morning, she returned to work. Her badge still opened the staff doors, though for how long, she didn't know. In the cafeteria, Kane walked past her, carrying his briefcase. Their eyes met briefly. His smile was thin, triumphant. Amara lowered her gaze and kept moving, pushing her cart toward the elevators. But as the doors closed, she whispered to herself, "You're wrong." In the reflection of the metal panel, she saw her own face, tired, yes, but no longer defeated. Somewhere deep inside, something had shifted. She might have lost her father's notebook, but she hadn't lost his knowledge. Every formula, every note, every translation lived inside her memory now. Kane could take the pages, but not the truth. When she stepped off the elevator, the hallway lights flickered. She walked past the lab where his research team worked behind glass walls, laughing over his latest breakthrough. She paused, watching them for a long moment. Then she turned away and continued down the hall, her steps quiet but sure. Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking, letting in thin stripes of light. She looked up through the glass doors and thought, "He thinks he's won. Let him believe it a little longer." The apartment was dark, except for the weak glow from the street lamp outside. Rain tapped steadily against the window, tracing slow lines down the glass. Amara sat at the kitchen table, her head resting on folded arms, the hospital's warning letter crumpled beside an empty cup of coffee. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Kane's face, the smug certainty when he had tucked her father's notebook into his briefcase. He had taken not only the evidence, but the last piece of her father's handwriting, the scent of sandalwood and ink that used to fill their home. She opened her eyes and stared at the thin crack in the ceiling. Her body ached from exhaustion, but her mind refused to stop moving. Somewhere in that hospital sat the proof she needed, buried under reports and presentations, waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to pull it into the light. She thought of Emily's warning, of how close she'd already come to losing everything. But she also thought of her mother's trembling hands, her father's quiet voice. "If the world silences your words," he had said, "let your actions translate them." The phrase echoed in her head like a heartbeat. Her phone buzzed on the table. A text from Emily. "They're signing the funding deal Friday morning. After that, it's locked. You have 2 days." Amara stared at the message. 2 days before the formula became officially the Kane Protocol. 2 days before her father's name was buried for good. She replied only with, "I understand." Then she closed her phone and sat very still, listening to the rain. The next day passed in a blur. She went through the motions of her shift, mopping floors, wiping glass, emptying trash bins, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. Every time she passed the lab door, she caught fragments of conversation. Kane's brilliance, revolutionary research, the investors are thrilled. The words stung like salt. No one questioned where the brilliance came from. No one even wondered why a maid's badge had shown up in the system that night. The world preferred its stories simple. That night, she didn't go home right away. She stayed late under the pretense of cleaning the executive offices. The corridors were empty except for the low hum of lights and the distant throb of generators. The hospital was a different world after hours, quieter but not peaceful. The air carried a tension, as if the walls themselves were waiting. She made her way to the conference room where Kane usually held his meetings. The door was locked, but the cleaning staff had universal access. She swiped her card and slipped inside. The room smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink. Papers were scattered across the long table, and the whiteboard still bore fragments of equations. On the side credenza sat a sleek black laptop. She hesitated only a moment before approaching it. The screen flickered to life. Password protected, of course. But next to the keyboard lay a small external drive labeled Research Archive 2024. Her breath caught. She plugged it into her pocket translator device, an old model her father had once used, and the files appeared. Dozens of PDFs, spreadsheets, scanned notes. At the bottom, original Yoruba drafts, Source A, Johnson. Her hands trembled. For a second, she couldn't breathe. He hadn't even bothered to rename the folder. She copied everything onto her flash drive, her heart hammering so loudly she was sure the security cameras could hear it. When the progress bar reached 100%, she yanked the drive free and slipped it into her pocket. As she turned to leave, the overhead lights flickered. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. She froze. The knob turned, then stopped. Someone cursed softly under their breath. She recognized the voice. Kane. The handle rattled again, then the sound of keys. She darted behind the heavy drapes by the window just as the door opened. Kane entered, muttering about forgotten notes. He crossed to the table, flipping through papers. The smell of his cologne filled the air, sharp and clinical. "Where's the draft folder?" he murmured to himself. He checked the laptop, frowned, then glanced around. For one terrible moment, Amara thought he could hear her breathing. Her knees ached from crouching, but she didn't move. After what felt like hours, he closed the laptop, grabbed a few documents, and left. The door clicked shut. Amara waited another full minute before slipping out from behind the curtain. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She walked quickly down the hall, forcing herself not to run. When she reached the stairwell, she exhaled shakily and leaned against the wall. Her legs felt weak, but her mind was clear. She had it, the proof. Back at her apartment, she plugged the drive into her laptop, the screen filled with scanned pages, her father's handwriting unmistakable. Notes about chemical ratios, patient safety, handwritten reminders. Always share knowledge, never sell it. She pressed a hand to her mouth. "You're still here," she whispered. She spent the next hours organizing the files, translating key sections into English. Her old laptop groaned under the load, the fan wheezing like an old man trying to keep up. She created a folder labeled Evidence, Original Work by Dr. Adewale Johnson. Her plan was simple. If Kane tried to deny her father's authorship, she would email the files to the medical board, the hospital trustees, even the press if necessary. But plans were fragile things. The next morning, she arrived at work to find the mood electric. The hospital buzzed with preparation for Friday's signing ceremony. Journalists were coming. The board was gathering. Banners had been hung in the lobby. Innovation for a better tomorrow, the Kane Protocol. She stopped to stare at them, the words blurring for a moment as her vision wavered. Emily appeared beside her. "You look like you haven't slept," Emily said softly. "I haven't," Amara replied. "You got something, didn't you?" Amara nodded. "Proof. Enough to destroy him." Emily glanced around, lowering her voice. "Then you need to be careful. He's got friends everywhere. If he even suspects." Before she could finish, a voice interrupted them. "Miss Johnson." It was the security chief, flanked by two guards. "Dr. Kane wants to see you." Emily's hand tightened around Amara's arm. "Don't go alone." But she had no choice. They escorted her to the administrative office, where Kane stood by the window, his back to her, sunlight glinting off his hair. When he turned, he was smiling. The notebook was in his hand again. "Still playing detective?" he said smoothly. "You've caused quite a stir, you know. Midnight logins, missing files. We could call the police or immigration, but I'm feeling generous." He placed the notebook on the desk. "You want this back? Then sign this." He slid a document across the desk, an agreement stating that she had accessed confidential materials illegally and would resign immediately. In exchange, he'd drop all charges and let her return to her country peacefully. Amara stared at the paper, her pulse thudded in her ears. "You're afraid," she said finally. Kane laughed. "Of you? Hardly. I just don't like distractions." "I'm not signing." His smile vanished. "Think carefully. Without a job, without a visa, where will you go? Who will care for your mother?" Her eyes burned, but she didn't look away. "You can take everything you want," she said softly, "but you'll never own what he wrote. Not really." Kane's jaw tightened. You'll regret that." She turned and walked out before he could answer, the echo of her footsteps sharp against the marble floor. In her pocket, the flash drive pressed against her palm, small and solid as faith. That night, she sat by her mother's hospital bed. The older woman was sleeping, her breathing shallow but steady. Amara held her hand, tracing the lines of her skin. "I'm going to fix it, Mama," she whispered, "even if it costs me everything." Outside, thunder rolled over the city. Lightning flashed against the glass, illuminating her reflection. A woman no longer invisible, her face set with quiet determination. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was cleaning up someone else's mess. She was preparing for a fight. The hospital gleamed like glass under the Friday morning sun. Banners fluttered in the lobby, and a brass signboard announced the event in bold blue letters: Global Partnership Signing Ceremony, the Kane Protocol. Photographers arrived early, setting up tripods, while nurses and interns craned their necks for a glimpse of the man of the hour. Dr. Richard Kane, polished as ever, strode through the crowd in his white coat, shaking hands and smiling like a man born to applause. Amara stood near the service elevator, gripping her cleaning cart hard enough to whiten her knuckles. She wore her standard uniform, navy slacks, white shirt, a thin gray sweater, but her mind felt far from the role. In her pocket, the flash drive felt like a pulse against her thigh. Emily had begged her to reconsider. "You don't have to go through with this," she had whispered that morning. "We can leak the files anonymously." But anonymity no longer felt like enough. Her father had been anonymous his whole life. A pair of executives brushed past her, laughing. "The minister from Abuja's on the call already," one said. "Big day for Kane. He's practically a hero back home." Amara watched them disappear through the conference doors. Hero. The word sat bitter on her tongue. She adjusted her name badge, tucked a cloth under her arm, and followed with the quiet authority of someone invisible. Inside, the room buzzed with energy. A long, polished table dominated the center, ringed with board members, investors, and high-ranking staff. At the far end, a large screen displayed the video feed from Nigeria, officials from the Ministry of Health, journalists, and, to Amara's surprise, an older woman in a pale green headscarf, Dr. Kemi Onasanya, one of her father's former colleagues. Her heart jumped. She hadn't seen Dr. Onasanya in years, not since her father's funeral. The memory came rushing back. The woman's steady voice saying, "Your father was the kind of man who planted trees, knowing he'd never sit in their shade." Amara swallowed hard and began moving along the perimeter of the room, pretending to wipe surfaces. She was close enough now to hear Kane's voice booming over the chatter. "This project represents a bridge between innovation and compassion," he said, every syllable dripping with false humility. "The Kane Protocol will revolutionize anesthesia safety in developing nations." Dr. Onasanya's image on the screen nodded politely, though her expression remained unreadable. Amara's hands trembled around the cloth. She wanted to shout, to tear down the illusion, but fear sat like a stone in her throat. She forced herself to breathe. This was her chance, the only one she'd ever get. Kane's assistant, a young man with slicked hair, handed out printed copies of the final agreement. Amara caught a glimpse of the header as she passed him. Proprietary patent, Richard M. Kane, M.D. Her father's name, erased. The words blurred as rage burned behind her eyes. The ceremony began. A staff photographer gave a cue. Kane stepped forward, smiling into the cameras. "Before we sign," he said, "I'd like to extend my personal gratitude to everyone who made this possible. To my team, to our international partners, and to St. Pat Aurelius for believing in the power of science to unite us." He paused, savoring the applause. Then he turned to the screen. "Dr. Onasanya, would you care to say a few words before we proceed?" The woman on the monitor adjusted her glasses. "Of course, Dr. Kane, but first I have a question." The room quieted. Kane's smile faltered slightly. "A question?" "Yes," she said evenly. "I reviewed your technical translation last night. There's a Yoruba phrase I'd like clarified before we sign. It appears multiple times in the source document, Efunalaye. Could you tell us how you translated it?" Kane chuckled, clearly thrown off but unwilling to show it. "Ah, yes, that phrase refers to exclusive production rights, ownership of formula derivatives, if I recall correctly." Amara's heart hammered. She felt her throat tighten with both fear and fury. "No, that's not what it means. Dr. Onasanya's brow furrowed. Are you certain? Because as a native Yoruba speaker, I would translate Efun Alaye as the sharing of life, quite the opposite of ownership. The silence that followed was thick enough to taste. Kane's smile froze, the color draining slightly from his face. Well, he said quickly, perhaps in local dialects there are variations. No, Amara said aloud. The single word sliced through the air. Heads turned. Kane blinked, taken aback, as the woman with the cleaning cart stepped forward. Excuse me, he said, half incredulous. You mistranslated it, Amara said, her voice steady now. Efunalaya doesn't mean ownership. It means life shared freely without condition. It's the foundation of the formula's purpose. Kane's mouth opened, then closed again. The room seemed to shrink around them. And you are? One of the board members demanded. Amara took a breath. Amara Johnson, maintenance staff. She straightened her back, every eye on her. And the daughter of Dr. Adewale Johnson, the man who wrote that formula you now call yours. A low murmur rippled through the room. Kane laughed, a hollow, nervous sound. This is absurd. Security. No, said Dr. Onasanya sharply from the screen. Let her speak. Amara met Kane's eyes. You stole his work. You erased his name, changed the formula, and turned something meant to save lives into another way to make money. But the truth is still written in his hand, in every Yoruba word you couldn't understand. Kane's voice rose. This woman is lying. She's trying to extort. Emily, standing quietly near the door, stepped forward and held up a printed folder. I can confirm that the handwriting in the source notes matches the late Dr. Johnson's research journals. We compared them this morning. Kane's face darkened. You little... But before he could finish, Dr. Onasanya's voice filled the room again, calm and cutting. Dr. Kane, our ministry's forensic team reviewed your submission earlier this week. We found inconsistencies between your English translation and the Yoruba original. Miss Johnson is correct. A stunned silence followed. Cameras clicked, recording every word. Kane's lips moved, but no sound came out. His gaze flicked between Amara, the board, and the screen, searching for an escape. Amara stepped closer to the table. You wanted to bridge innovation and compassion, she said softly. Here's your bridge. She reached into her pocket and placed the flash drive beside the contract. That contains every original document, scanned, dated, signed by my father. Proof of who the real innovator was. For a moment, no one breathed. Then Dr. Onasanya smiled faintly. It seems the truth needed a translator after all. Kane's hand trembled as he gripped the edge of the table. You think this changes anything? Do you have any idea what kind of power you're playing with? Amara met his glare without flinching. Yes, she said, the kind that doesn't belong to you. She turned and walked toward the door. No one stopped her. The room behind her buzzed with whispers and the faint crackle of cameras. Kane called her name once, but it was lost under the rising noise of voices demanding answers. In the hallway, Emily caught up to her, breathless. You just blew up his entire career, she said, half terrified, half awed. Amara exhaled, feeling the tremor in her limbs. No, she said softly. I just translated what was already true. Outside, the sun had broken through the clouds. Through the tall windows, light spilled across the marble floor like a benediction. For the first time since her father's death, Amara lifted her face to it and didn't look away. The room had erupted into noise after she left. Through the glass hallway, Amara could still hear the rising pitch of voices, the confusion spreading like fire. Cameras flashed, chairs scraped against the floor, and the once confident laughter of executives had turned into nervous murmurs. She didn't turn back. Her steps echoed across the corridor, sharp and certain. For the first time, the marble didn't seem to swallow her sound. It carried it, amplified it, as if the building itself finally acknowledged she was there. Emily caught up to her near the service elevator. They're calling an emergency meeting, she whispered, glancing back toward the conference room. You have no idea what you just did. I told the truth, Amara said. You told it in a room full of millionaires, cameras, and lawyers. Emily's voice shook with both fear and awe. You better pray someone in there still has a conscience. The elevator doors opened, and Amara stepped inside. She looked at Emily, her face pale but steady. Conscience or not, she said, they heard me. By the time she reached the ground floor, the hospital buzzed like a hive. People were glued to their phones, replaying the live feed of the meeting that had just been broadcast on the hospital's internal network. In the video, her voice came through clear as a bell. "You mistranslated it." The phrase was already trending on social media among hospital staff. In the lobby, reporters were gathering, tipped off by someone inside. Amara slipped through the side exit into the rain. It was cold, but the air tasted different, cleaner somehow. She walked quickly to the small cafe across the street, found an empty table by the window, and sat down. Her hands trembled as she ordered tea. The waitress, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes, recognized her from the hospital. "Rough day?" she asked. Amara smiled faintly. "Something like that." The woman chuckled. "Honey, it's barely noon." Outside, cars splashed through puddles. Across the street, she could see the hospital entrance, where security guards were trying to manage the crowd of reporters. She sipped her tea slowly, her heart still racing. Her phone buzzed again, messages from Emily flooding in. They froze the signing. Kane's panicking. The board's calling for a review. "You did it." She stared at the screen, not quite believing it. Then another message appeared, this one from an unknown number. "Miss Johnson, this is Dr. Kemi Onasanya. Please return to the conference room immediately. We need your assistance." For a moment, fear crept back in. What if it was a trap? But then she remembered Dr. Onasanya's voice from the video call, the sharpness, the authority. She took a deep breath, finished her tea, and walked back into the storm. Inside, the atmosphere had changed. The executives who had once looked down on her now avoided her gaze. A few of them whispered to each other, their faces drawn. In the conference room, the video call with Nigeria was still active. Dr. Onasanya's face filled the screen, calm and resolute. Kane stood off to the side, red-faced and silent. "Miss Johnson," Dr. Onasanya said warmly when Amara entered, "I'm glad you returned. We've been reviewing the files you provided. They're remarkable." Amara swallowed hard. "They're my father's work. I just wanted the truth to be seen." "It has been," the doctor replied, "and it appears his legacy may have saved us from a very costly mistake." She turned toward the board members seated around the table. Dr. Kane's translation omitted several key clauses, ones that would have violated both international patent law and our ethical agreements. If we had signed that contract, St. Aurelius could have faced criminal penalties. A collective murmur rippled through the room. Kane's jaw tightened. "This is absurd." Those clauses were insignificant, technical semantics. Dr. Onasanya raised an eyebrow. "You call exploiting open source research semantics? You deliberately changed the phrase shared life formula to exclusive ownership. That's not semantics, doctor. That's theft." All eyes turned to Kane. For a man so accustomed to control, he looked small, trapped. His hands fidgeted on the table. "You can't prove that We can," Amara interrupted. Her voice was quiet, but it cut cleanly through the room. "The metadata in your files shows my father's signature on every original page. You copied his formula, you replaced his name, and you built a lie big enough for the world to cheer for it." The boardroom fell silent. The only sound was the rain beating against the windows. Dr. Onasanya's tone softened as she looked at Amara. "Your father's work will not be forgotten again. The Nigerian Ministry of Health will restore full credit to his name. But there is one more matter." Amara's stomach tightened. "What matter?" "The partnership will still proceed," she said. "However, our ministry insists that you, Miss Johnson, serve as liaison for the implementation phase. We believe you're uniquely qualified to ensure the research remains faithful to its original purpose." It took a moment for the words to sink in. Across the table, Kane's head snapped up. "You can't be serious," he said sharply. "She's not even. She cleans floors." Dr. Onasanya's expression didn't change. "And yet she just cleaned up your reputation." A few board members exchanged uneasy glances, suppressing smiles. Kane started to speak again, but the chairman raised a hand. "Enough, Richard. You've done enough damage." Kane's face went pale. "You're making a mistake." "No," Amara said quietly. "You made one." The chairman nodded toward her. "Miss Johnson, we'll formalize the liaison position by next week. The hospital owes you and your father a debt we can't repay, but we'll start there." It felt unreal, the words echoing in her head. For so long she had dreamed of being seen, not as a maid, not as a mistake, but as someone who mattered. Now it was happening. Right there in the same room where she'd once been invisible. Kane gathered his papers with shaking hands. "This isn't over," he muttered, his voice low but venomous. "You'll regret humiliating me." Amara looked at him, her gaze steady. "You've spent your whole life mistaking power for worth. Maybe now you'll learn the difference." He hesitated as if to reply, then turned and stormed out. The door shut behind him with a sound that felt final. Dr. Onasanya smiled gently through the screen. "Your father would be proud, Amara." Amara's throat tightened. He just wanted people to share what they built. He said knowledge was only alive when it was passed on. "And now it will be," the doctor said. "We'll see to that." As the meeting dispersed, Emily slipped in quietly, her eyes wide. "Is it true?" she whispered. "They're giving you a position?" Amara nodded, still dazed. "Something like that." Emily grinned. "I knew you'd make him eat those words someday." Amara smiled back, though tears shimmered at the edges of her eyes. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a deep trembling relief. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a shadow walking behind other people's greatness. She felt the weight of her father's notebook in her heart, solid and whole again. As she left the building, the rain had stopped. The city glistened under a new, fragile sunlight. She looked up, letting it touch her face. Somewhere she imagined her father's voice in the wind, soft and certain. Words build bridges between worlds. She whispered back, "We built one today, Papa." Then she stepped into the light, ready for whatever waited beyond it. The storm hit just after sunset, rattling the hospital windows like a warning. The air smelled of ozone and wet concrete. Amara stood at the bus stop across the street, clutching her coat around her as thunder rolled overhead. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, messages she didn't want to read. The news of Kane's suspension had spread like wildfire through the medical community. Some called it justice, others called it scandal. But for Amara, it didn't feel like victory yet. Her father's name had been cleared, yes, but her mother's hospital bills were still piling up. Her job was still hanging by a thread, and Kane wasn't the kind of man to accept defeat quietly. She reached her apartment drenched to the bone. The power had flickered out, leaving the small space lit only by the glow of a single candle. She changed into dry clothes and sat by the window, staring at the flash drive that had changed everything. It was still in her pocket, warm from her body heat. Proof, justice, revenge. Whatever it was, it had come at a cost she couldn't yet calculate. The phone buzzed again, a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated before answering. "Miss Johnson?" The voice on the other end was clipped, male, unfamiliar. "This is Henry Lowell, legal counsel for Dr. Kane." She didn't speak. He continued, calm and rehearsed. "My client wishes to resolve this situation quietly. He's prepared to offer you financial compensation, substantial compensation, in exchange for your cooperation. You'd sign a confidentiality agreement, of course. We can discuss the details tomorrow." Amara laughed, low and bitter. "He wants to buy silence again." "Miss Johnson, this would benefit both parties. You've proven your point. There's no need to drag this further. It's not good for the hospital, or your, shall we say, status here." She stared out the window at the lightning splitting the sky. "Tell him I don't sell my father's name," she said. "Not again." The lawyer sighed. "Think about it, Miss Johnson. People like you rarely get second chances." She hung up before he could finish and set the phone face down on the table. The candle flickered wildly, casting long shadows on the wall. Somewhere in those shadows she thought she saw her father's face, tired but proud. The next day dawned gray and heavy. When she arrived at the hospital, the whispers started again, quieter now but sharper. Some people smiled politely, others looked away. Emily found her near the elevators. "You heard about Kane?" she asked, her voice hushed. "What about him?" "They're trying to push a deal. He's threatening to sue for defamation. Says you hacked his files." Amara stiffened. "He can try." Emily glanced around nervously. "Be careful. He's desperate. Desperate men do stupid things." By afternoon, she understood what Emily meant. Her supervisor called her into the office, a middle-aged man with kind eyes who looked more nervous than she'd ever seen him. "Amara," he began, "there's been a request from administration. They're conducting an internal investigation. You'll need to take temporary leave until it's resolved." She stared at him. "You're suspending me?" "It's standard procedure," he said quickly. "You'll still get partial pay. Just stay out of sight until things settle." She wanted to scream, to throw the chair across the room, but the fight had been wrung out of her. I see, she said quietly. When she walked out, the hallways felt longer, emptier. The very walls she'd scrubbed clean now seemed to close in around her. She packed her few things, a rag, a thermos, her ID badge, and left without saying goodbye. That evening, she visited her mother at the nursing home again. The older woman was awake, her eyes glassy but gentle. You look tired, her mother murmured. I'm fine. Your father used to say that when he wasn't, her mother said, smiling faintly. Then he'd stay up all night trying to fix the world. Amara sat beside her bed. I don't know if I'm fixing anything, Mama. Every time I push back, they just build another wall. Her mother squeezed her hand weakly. Then climb it. You're his daughter. You don't stop. Tears filled Amara's eyes. He believed the world would listen if the truth was loud enough. It will, her mother whispered, even if it has to go through storms first. That night, back in her apartment, she received another call, this time from an unknown woman's voice. Miss Johnson, this is Lydia Burns with the Boston Herald. We're running a story about St. Aurelius and the research controversy. We'd like to include your perspective. Amara froze. How did you get my number? Let's just say not everyone inside the hospital agrees with Dr. Kane's version of events. Off the record, of course. You'd be protected. But if you have documents, anything that supports your father's authorship, we can make sure the truth is seen, publicly. She hesitated. The memory of the last time her father had trusted a journalist haunted her. His words had been twisted, his name dragged through the mud. But this time, she wasn't the daughter of a quiet man trying to be polite. This time, she had proof. I'll think about it, she said, and hung up. The wind howled outside, the kind that made windows hum in their frames. She turned on her laptop and opened the folder labeled Evidence, Original Work by Dr. Adewale Johnson. The files glowed faintly in the dark room. She scrolled through the scanned pages, pausing on one written entirely in her father's handwriting. Knowledge belongs to everyone, he'd written in English at the bottom of the page. Not to kings, not to companies. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Emily. He's trying to destroy the files. Back up everything. Now. Amara's stomach dropped. She copied every document onto a cloud drive, then another external disk. She'd seen what men like Kane could do when cornered. By midnight, she'd backed up 3 versions and hidden one in a safety deposit box near the station. The next morning, the story broke. Whistleblower exposes medical fraud at St. Aurelius Hospital. The headline ran across every local outlet. Amara's name wasn't mentioned, but everyone inside the hospital knew. Kane was summoned to a disciplinary hearing. The pharmaceutical company suspended its contract pending investigation. For the first time, the scales tipped toward truth. She walked to the hospital that afternoon, not to work but to watch. From across the street, she saw Kane leaving through the side entrance, flanked by 2 security guards. His coat was soaked, his expression hollow. The cameras caught him like a man walking out of a burning building. He looked up once and saw her standing there beneath an umbrella. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, without a word, he turned away. Amara lowered the umbrella, letting the rain wash over her face. It was cold, but it felt clean. She had lost her job, maybe her career, but something far greater had been restored. Her father's name no longer lived in the margins. It was out in the world, unerasable. When she went home that night, the city lights reflected in puddles like tiny stars. She sat at her desk, opened her father's digital file, and added one final note at the end of his work. For those who believe silence keeps you safe, it doesn't. Speak anyway. She saved the document and leaned back in her chair, exhausted but peaceful. Somewhere outside, thunder grumbled again, softer now, like a storm finally winding down. 6 months later, spring crept quietly into Boston, softening the edges of the city. The magnolias outside St. Aurelius Hospital bloomed pale pink, their petals scattering across the sidewalk like confetti. Inside, the hallways no longer felt like corridors of silence. New posters hung on the walls, diversity initiatives, scholarship announcements, community outreach programs, all stamped with a name no one could erase anymore. The Johnson Institute for Global Medical Ethics. Amara adjusted the lapel of her white blazer as she walked past the front desk. Her badge gleamed beneath the hospital lights. Amara Johnson, Director of International Research Partnerships. She still wasn't used to the title. Sometimes she caught herself waiting for someone to stop her, to remind her she was just the maid. But no one did. The security guards nodded respectfully now. The nurses smiled. A few of the same executives who had once laughed in front of her now rose when she entered a room. Her office sat on the 12th floor, bright with glass walls and a view of the river. On her desk rested a framed photo of her parents, their faces frozen mid-laughter from decades ago. Beside it sat her father's leather notebook, the one she'd fought for, now preserved in a clear case. Every morning, she opened it for a moment, not to read, but to feel the presence in the faded handwriting. The scent of sandalwood still lingered faintly, as if time had refused to let it fade. A knock on the door broke her reverie. Emily stepped in, holding a stack of papers. "They're ready for you downstairs," she said with a grin. "Press conference starts in 10. The Nigerian delegation just arrived." Amara smiled. "How do I look?" "Like someone who finally sleeps 8 hours," Emily teased. "And like someone who's about to make history." "History," Amara said softly, "feels strange when you used to scrub it off the floors." Emily walked closer, her expression softening. "You earned this, every bit of it." Amara gathered her notes and the small jade green pen Emily had given her as a joke months ago. It wasn't real jade, just plastic, but she carried it anyway, a reminder of everything she'd lost and found again. Together, they rode the elevator down to the auditorium. The room buzzed with energy. Reporters filled the rows, cameras flashed, and representatives from both the hospital and the Nigerian Ministry of Health waited at the long table up front. In the first row sat her mother, thinner but recovering, dressed in her favorite lavender scarf. When their eyes met, the older woman smiled, tears already brimming. Amara's chest tightened, warmth spreading through her. The chairman of the hospital board began the introductions, his tone formal but reverent. "Today we celebrate not just a partnership between institutions, but a restoration of truth. The Johnson Protocol will honor the legacy of Dr. Adewale Johnson, a man whose brilliance and integrity transcended borders. And we welcome his daughter, Miss Amara Johnson, whose courage brought light to that truth." Applause filled the room. For a moment, Amara just stood there, hands clasped, the noise washing over her like a tide. When it quieted, she stepped to the podium. Her voice was calm, steady. "6 months ago, I stood in this building as a janitor. I cleaned these floors, emptied trash bins, and listened to people talk about innovation while stepping over the ones who made it possible. My father believed knowledge should serve everyone, not just those who can afford to claim it. Today, we honor that belief, not as a footnote, but as a foundation." She paused, scanning the crowd. What happened here wasn't just about a formula. It was about seeing what's been invisible for too long. My father once told me, words build bridges between worlds, but bridges only matter if people have the courage to cross them. The applause rose again, louder this time. Cameras clicked. Her mother wiped her eyes. After the speeches, she joined Dr. Kemi Onasanya and the other delegates to sign the final documents. The new partnership guaranteed open access to her father's formula, funding for underprivileged hospitals across Africa, and a fellowship program in his name. When it was done, Dr. Onasanya leaned toward her and whispered, "Your father's legacy is alive again, child, and so is yours." Outside, the sun broke through the clouds. The air smelled faintly of rain and blossoms. Amara stepped into the courtyard, away from the cameras and chatter. Her mother sat on a bench, waiting. Amara walked over and took her hand. "You did it," her mother said softly. "He'd be so proud." Amara smiled. "We did it. You kept me standing." They sat together in silence, watching petals drift across the pavement. For the first time in years, the world felt balanced. There would still be battles. She knew that. The hospital's reform program was just beginning, and not everyone welcomed it. But she had learned that justice wasn't a single victory. It was a language you had to keep speaking, no matter who tried to silence it. Later that evening, long after everyone had gone, she returned to her office. The city lights shimmered on the river below. She unlocked the case on her desk and opened her father's notebook. On the last page, beneath his old signature, she added a line in careful handwriting. "For those who believed silence was safer, thank you for proving it isn't." She placed the pen down and closed the book gently. The phone on her desk buzzed with a message from Emily. "Check the news. Kane resigned from his private firm. He's gone quiet." Amara typed back simply, "Let him stay that way." She turned off the lights and stood at the window. Below, the hospital glowed with its usual rhythm. Ambulances coming and going, lives being saved by people whose names might never make headlines. Somewhere among them, a new intern might read her father's research, never knowing the long fight it took to keep his name attached to it. That was all right. The work mattered more than the credit. As she gazed at the skyline, she thought of her father again, his laugh, his steady hands, his belief that the world could be kinder if people just listened. She whispered into the quiet, "We translated it, Papa. The world finally understands." Then she smiled, turned off the lamp, and walked out into the corridor where the night shift had begun. The echo of her steps mingled with the distant hum of machines, steady and sure. Outside, the wind carried the scent of spring through the open doors, and for the first time in a long while, she felt completely, undeniably free.